Hey guys, welcome back to Critical Flick. Today I'll be reviewing Babylon. Babylon is the newest film from Damien Chazelle, and he's put out some phenomenal films in the past few years, so I had some pretty high expectations for this one. And I have to say right away, there are going to be some spoilers in this review, so if you don't want any spoilers, I would click off now, watch the movie, and maybe come back later. This film takes place in the golden era of Hollywood in the 1920s and the 1930s. It particularly focuses around the transition in Hollywood from silent films to the introduction of sound. It follows an aspiring actress named Nellie Leroy, who's played by Margot Robbie. Brad Pitt's also in this film as Jack Conrad, who plays like an A-list actor who's kind of coming to the grips with kind of the twilight of his career. In this film, you're watching his career kind of burn out throughout the movie. Diego Calva plays Manny Torres in this movie, and he is a film assistant, and he's also an immigrant that's trying to find his way in Hollywood. He's kind of trying to chase his Hollywood dream. The movie is really unabashedly about excess. The movie itself is so overblown and so overstimulating that I think that's some things that people may not like about it, but it lets you know right away this movie is going to be crass, this movie is going to be intense, and it's going to really just not let up the whole time. It starts off even with a really graphic scene involving an elephant kind of defecating on people. It just gets weirder and weirder from there. The big first major sequence takes place at a big party at a mansion where all these celebrities are coming together and just committing the ultimate debauchery. It's this huge and over-the-top party where there's just nudity and drugs and everything you can think of when you think of like the seedy side of Hollywood is all taking place, and it's coming together at one location. And I think that Chazelle does a great job of kind of setting the stakes and the expectations of our characters in that first scene. You have Manny Torres, who's someone who's willing to do anything to achieve his dream. He is a hard worker. He will do anything for anyone to try and get ahead and try and succeed in this world. You have Nellie, who's the same way, but in a different facet. She just wants to kind of work her way into the Hollywood inner circles to find fame, to find fortune. You have Jack Conrad, who's kind of the leading man of Hollywood. Brad Pitt does a great job of playing kind of a god amongst men in this movie. I feel like it's definitely something you can probably pull from his personal life, being kind of one of the biggest male celebrities of all time. And I feel like in that first sequence, we really get to see some of that trademark camera work that we've seen in some of the filmmakers' previous movies. La La Land, you had a lot of those shots as well where he would like pan one way, pan back, do that over and over again. He does that in some of these sequences. He also has a great eye of creating a very big scope for his work, because I feel like the way the camera tends to move around in kind of a long, wide shot, it makes everything feel so much bigger. It feels like you're seeing in front of, behind the camera. It feels very immersive, like you're in this kind of wild environment. You feel immediately thrown in to the intensity of this movie. And that intensity doesn't really let up for like the 3-hour runtime of this movie. It puts its foot on the gas and very seldom stops. Margot Robbie is excellent as Nellie Leroy. It is skirting the line on being very Harley Quinn-esque, especially in the beginning of the film. You feel like she's definitely channeling that character, that same energy, but she's so good at it that I can't fault her being written into that style. But as the movie moves along and you get to see her struggling and her hard moments, she has one of the most complete character arcs I've seen in a character in a film in so long, because the movie is long enough to give all these characters really a beginning, middle, and final act that you feel so invested in them, even though the movie kind of does lack a little bit of a narrative thread. And that's probably my biggest knock on this movie. While I think it is excellently acted, it's so well shot and directed, the production design is almost second to none. It just really moves along at a strange pace where it can jump years, it can jump a couple years, and you're just kind of following along with these characters. Some characters disappear, some characters come back, and it just feels like that narrative thread isn't being followed throughout the film. It feels like when they wanted to make this movie, you have some really incredible scenes, some incredible set pieces, and kind of it was an afterthought of how we're going to piece all these together. You can almost feel an influence of all the big players in Hollywood. You feel almost like Tarantino in this movie. You feel some aspects of Scorsese, some aspects of Spielberg, and it really is a joy to watch as a movie fan to see those kind of influences. But at the same time, that lack of narrative thread really does make it hard to really stick with this movie for 3 hours, and also that high intensity, that high energy that never lets up. It is a little bit overbearing. I think some of the less intense scenes are actually some of the better scenes in the movie. There's a scene in particular where Brad Pitt's character is speaking with a reporter. He's writing about kind of the downfall of his career, and you get this concept of why someone becomes just not a star anymore in Hollywood. It talks about the idea of immortality in film, and I think that's a really intriguing concept, that when you see people on a screen on a movie that came out 50, 60, 70 years ago, those people aren't alive anymore. And you're watching someone like they're there. You feel connected to them. And I think that connection is something that isn't really explored in Hollywood. And I feel like the longer and longer film is around, the more and more we'll start to understand that connection and kind of the ghosts of that. She mentions how people are being ghosts being reborn each time the film was put back on screen. And that's just such a compelling idea to me. While I feel Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt are kind of getting the most acclaim for this movie, I think that Diego Calva is also excellent in the movie. He gets a really great character arc where you see him kind of achieve his dream. And it almost falls into that idea of be careful what you wish for, because he thinks he wants to be this huge executive and be this super successful person in Hollywood, but that comes with the pitfalls of having that success and having that pressure. His character almost feels like the parallel to Nellie's character. They both start in the same position. They both get the same almost opportunity at the same time, but you see their paths divulge, with Nellie having this almost meteoric rise to fame, flying too close to the sun. She feels like, Icarus. She feels almost like this supernova on screen that has become so successful so fast that it's not sustainable. And I think she does a great job of playing that character, that intense energy, that mania, that wildness of the character. So I think there's some really good chemistry between Margot Robbie and Diego Calva in this movie, because they do play somewhat of love interest, and you feel the connection between these two people. You feel like they see each other for who they are, particularly Manny seeing Nellie as a person instead of a star. And some of their moments together were probably the most heartfelt and touching moments in the movie. While I mentioned those kind of heartfelt scenes and the intensity of the movie, there are a lot of comedic elements to the movie. And I think the comedy of the movie is one of the things that kind of helps it move along. It has almost like a Wolf of Wall Street kind of comedy to it. So with being 3 hours long, you're able to break that up with some laughs in between, so it doesn't feel like quite a slog to get through. But I do think the thing that the director was able to really show and excel more than anything else in this film is the pure excess and debauchery of the golden age of Hollywood, the unchecked and unbridled just insanity of what may have happened at that time is kind of created for this movie. It's particularly with Tobey Maguire's character. He plays a mob boss in this film, and he's kind of like a later act. It's right towards the end of the movie. And he takes our characters into this underground, seedy, literal underbelly of Hollywood, where there's just this grotesque and disgusting and macabre things happening for the pure idea of spectacle. I feel like those scenes in particular kind of reflect the darkest sides of human nature in entertainment, how we want to see the weirdest things, the most strange things. Some people just want to see things for the sake of spectacle, but it is kind of a weird tone shift. We go from a movie that is pretty serious with a little bit of comedy to almost like a horror film in the third act. It's a quite a stark shift, but I do think it's a really well executed shift. And while this movie does focus on the underbelly and the excess of Hollywood, it also kind of turns a mirror on the hypocrisy of Hollywood. There's a character named Sidney Palmer who's played by Giovanna Depo in this film, and he plays a jazz player that is kind of thrown into the spotlight of being a celebrity. He's just kind of a background character in the beginning of the film, and he slowly becomes more and more famous and more popular, and Hollywood is propping him up simply because he's African American. And there's even like a really intense scene where he's forced to put even more darkening stuff on his face, some kohl on his face to look even darker, because they feel like he doesn't look black enough. And it's very strange. It points out Hollywood virtue signaling and kind of using people as props instead of really who they are, kind of trying to make themselves feel better about what they're doing. And I think that's a really interesting concept that we can even talk about today. Obviously, there's social discourse around similar things. So it's kind of interesting how this movie is able to tackle that taking place in the past. But I do think the thing that really keeps this film from being exceptional and being like a real masterpiece is the fact that I feel like some of the excess and the over-the-top nature of the movie kind of takes away from some of the themes. I think the underpinning themes are some really well-executed and really interesting concepts, but we're constantly thrown into these really extreme and graphic scenes that I think that's what people are going to focus on. I feel like it takes you out of feeling anything because you're seeing such intensity and such graphic things popping on the screen in front of you. Even with the end of the film, we see Manny come back to Hollywood. He's escaped it. He's gotten out of the beast that is Hollywood. And he comes back to watch a film that's showing the events of his own life, showing the events of Nellie, and seeing that kind of idea again of immortality and people back on the screen and kind of that constant cycle. And then we get kind of a crazy dreamlike sequence where we're seeing film throughout the years and seeing film go and go and go. And I was not expecting to see like an Avatar reference in this movie. And it just felt like at the end of the film, they really wanted to drive home the point of what film is and what it means to be an audience. And they turned the camera back on the audience to kind of end the movie. And I think that's a powerful message, but it feels so strange after watching this movie from the beginning to this point to have this almost fourth wall break at the end. I personally liked it, but I do think it's a very bold choice to make. So all in all, if I were to rate Babylon, I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. I think if it just got tightened up just a little bit more, it really could have been something exceptional, something really masterful. And Chazelle definitely went for it in this movie. I'm glad that he took the risks that he did. I don't think it's a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it's one of those films that it needs to age. I feel like it needs to be returned to over and over again to really be understood and be pushed forward into that kind of upper echelons of films. So if you check out Babylon, let me know what you thought about it. Maybe you enjoyed it more than I did. Maybe you hated it. I think it's one of those movies that people could go into and absolutely hate this movie. I think there's people that could go into this movie and absolutely love it. It's really interesting because even when I was watching it and leaving the theater, I didn't know how to feel. I felt so strange about it. I watched it with my brother-in-law, and even he was like, I don't know how I feel about it. I liked it, but there's parts of it that just felt off. And maybe that's something that the filmmaker was going for. Maybe he's trying to make you feel uncomfortable as an audience. And I think it really exceeded in making you feel a lot throughout this movie. It's just, I don't know how I felt about what I felt. So again, thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and see you guys next time.